So I was reading the Tao Te Ching last night, and there's this part towards the beginning of the Tao Te Ching where Lao Tzu basically goes like, this book often deals in the invisible forces of the world and says that like there is no way that he can properly convey his points here. Basically like alluding to the fact that language is sort of this imperfect vessel to communicate the emotions, the ideas and the concepts that he wants to go into. First of all, what a way to start a book, right? Be like kind of, one, it's kind of like awesome because it is the Tao Te Ching, but imagine like opening a book like back in, you know, early China or whatever, what was it, like the beginning of the Warring States period or something like that, and like the guy's just like, my ideas that I have to pitch here are so amazing that like are so complex, so grand that the words of this language are not nearly you know, precise enough to convey them. Like what a start, right? But it got me thinking, and in a weird way, right? I don't really agree with much of Taoism. I mean, I think it's nice, but like I think it's a little bit too you know, I think it falls in like hippie stuff a lot of the time, you know, to put it. That's an extremely disrespectful way to talk about an ancient philosophy. But that's, in layman's modern terms, that's kind of what it falls into a lot for me. And I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I think that there's something really interesting and really invaluable in that. Because, you know, Lao Tzu, whether you think he's a group or a person, you know, they were writing this at this time where they knew so little that they could genuinely say that, right? Nowadays, you know, me even starting an episode like this, let alone writing a very serious academic or philosophical text that starts with the idea of like, this book will deal in things I cannot prove, that's stupid. That'd be like, we'd consider that to be, it would never get published, it'd never get, you know, peer reviewed, it would never be taken seriously. But Lao Tzu existed this time where they knew little enough to the point where he could say something like that and it made sense. I also think this is a big difference in, you know, Eastern versus Western philosophy. I think Eastern philosophy does this amazingly, where Western philosophers are all these old guys that take themselves very seriously. Not to say the Eastern ones don't, but they take themselves so seriously that like they think they're gonna get you the best answer ever, when oftentimes they don't. I think Eastern philosophy does a great job of surrendering itself a little bit more to, you know, the world, and I think that's awesome, but that's a tangent aside. You know, I think it's awesome that this was being written at a time where he could say that, where he could go like, there are going to be ideal with invisible forces here, ideal in a sort of harmony of the universe in this book that cannot be put simply in words. I think that's awesome. I think it's really important to remember, one, that that's just like true, right? I think that society is kind of, I feel like society is so like, this is actually something I've noticed. I want to talk about this real quick. You'll notice I avoid the word society a lot, and I was thinking about it today while I was on my run. I think it's purely just because of the whole like we live in a society meme that was super relevant like a couple of years ago, and it's like it's always been kind of consistent. Like I think that's the reason I can't refer to anything as society. Like I think that's why I think I sound insane when I say it. That's a tangent aside. Once again though, I do feel that we are in a case of Dunning-Kruger right now. Dunning-Kruger, if you're unfamiliar, is this idea of like knowing enough to the point where you don't know what you don't know. So I think it's like around, once you learn about 20% of the knowledge of a topic, you feel like you know all of it. It's basically the idea, Neil deGrasse Tyson explained it like this once, and can't believe I'm quoting him right now, but he said like, Dunning-Kruger is when you don't know enough to know that you're wrong. And I do think, listen, I think it's a little bit, I think Dunning-Kruger, to go back to what Lao Tzu was saying, I don't think there's a word exactly for what I'm describing, because we are much smarter than knowing, you know, I don't think we're smart enough to know 20% of the universe and like all of this just yet as humanity. I also don't think that we're dumber than, you know, I don't think we're dumb enough to be in a Dunning-Kruger, but I feel like we're almost in this state of Dunning-Kruger where we're so advanced that we don't feel like we have so much left to learn. you know? And I wasn't around in like the 1920s, which I don't know why I'm saying that, as if it's like a big thing, like duh, right? So I wasn't around in the past, so maybe this isn't a new phenomenon. Maybe people have always just acted like this. But I feel like science has done us well enough, right? Science is advanced enough now where we're fully accepting it as truth, right? Like back in the day when somebody thought something, you wouldn't know if it was true. I think that's why we kind of had God, right? Because like that was our way of proving some sort of objective truth, or maybe that's why we all believed in God so heavily, because we needed some vessel for having an objective sense of truth, a feeling that we know something, right? Now we have science, which makes us feel like we know things, and it's very reliable. Science has gotten us like really far. I mean, like if you look at even something as simple as the technological advancement in the time I've been alive, like the last 3 decades, let's say, it's insane. From 1995 to right now, we have become a whole different species with the amount of technology. Like science has objectively gotten us really far, but I think it's gotten us far enough to the point where we're not fully recognizing that we have a lot left to learn. It's given us this sense of confidence in ourselves, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't have, but I think, and I think that a lot of scientists actually, the ones I know, and I don't know any like high scientists, but I know some people who are like in school and like have a very scientific brain. They're the most curious people I know, for sure. Right next to like philosophy students who are like annoyingly curious, kind of me a lot of the time, but right next to like people who are annoying about it, science students are so curious. They understand how little they know about things, and I think that's awesome, right? But I think that we have so much faith in science, rightfully so oftentimes, that we have forgotten how little we know and how much more we have left to learn. And this is to say that we know just enough to hear something like what Lao Tzu says at the beginning of the Tao Te Ching, that there are invisible forces that the mere constructed language that he has cannot fully describe. We are advanced enough to hear something like that nowadays and go, okay, so this guy should not be taken seriously. But we're not advanced enough to tell what those invisible forces are that we can all feel. And I think that's a kind of a problem. That's why I call this a Dunning-Kruger that I feel like we're all in right now. Because I think we know enough to the point where like we're really smart, but we don't know enough to the point where we can like really reliably like tell ourselves, okay, this is how everything works. That's another interesting question. Like, will we ever know how everything works? There's there's this one really famous run in Marvel Comics of the Fantastic Four, where at the beginning of it, Reed Richards, who's like the main character, he writes on a whiteboard, problem 100, solve everything. And he sets out at the beginning of the series, just solve everything. It's a sci-fi book, of course, Fantastic Four is. But that is, I think, an interesting question. Like, will we ever be at the point where we can explain everything? Because right now, so like, if you go back to the year, 1000 BC or whatever, like really ancient times, they knew nothing. So everything was just like guesswork, right? We've talked about this before, how when you don't know anything, you have the opportunity to know everything, right? Now we're at a point where that guesswork has gone off into different branches, right? And philosophy, the real guesswork that's left, is reserved for like a lot of big things. For example, like what's the meaning of life, right? This is something I've thought about for a long time, like in like 100 years, will we just have a branch of science that has discovered the meaning of life, that has found in the universe some sort of objective, I don't know if it'd be like a code or molecules or something. I don't know what it would even look like. This obviously, I'm getting into like some super bizarre sci-fi territory here with this discussion, but will that happen? Will we know what those invisible forces are? Because I think that, right now, us being smart enough to go like, okay, we should listen to science over a fat guy named Lao Tzu telling us about invisible sources. I do generally think that's good, right? Like it makes more sense. I feel like science will more often be correct, but I also think like we've lost a sense of spirituality. And I don't mean this in the sense of like, like, I think there's a lot of directions that kind of, I think people have made the observations I'm making here, right? And I don't think these are new in any regard, and I think people have taken them in a lot of directions. For an example, like, there's that whole anti-science, not like anti-science, but almost like an advocacy for a more naturalistic sense of science, of like, you shouldn't do anything that's of the modern day, you should use the science we have to live the perfect natural lifestyle. That's like a response people are having to this whole dilemma. There's also the other response that's kind of what I'm trying to avoid here, of like, we have lost a sense of spirituality, we need to go to church more, like, we need more spiritualism. And I think that's its own discussion. I do think there's a case that, society being more spiritual could be like a really good thing. I don't think that that's the answer though, because, well, one, that involves forcing everyone to do something, and two, I don't know, like, we were more spiritual before, right? And that wasn't really working, So I don't know if I want to go back there, but I think that we've lost a sense of, let's call it like a spiritual curiosity, if you will, of like, people don't, they hear like these invisible forces, or they hear these ideas that are maybe a little more spiritual, a little bit more out there, and their response is immediately to be like, no, that's stupid. We can explain that away with science, right? The invisible forces are emotions, or their, feelings, or their pheromones, or their molecules. Like, we have this desire to explain things away, and I think it forces people to not acknowledge that there is an unexplainable aspect that we have right now. I kind of think sometimes that we will in the future be able to explain everything. Like, me going back to what I'm saying of like, will we ever have a branch of science for the meaning of life? And I swear to God, if somebody comments like, technically we do know the meaning of life, it's to reproduce, like, please leave. I don't like that. That makes me really annoyed. I hate when people say that, because it's not. That's not the meaning, okay? That's not, we tried that, and also, like, that goes, but that's dumb. No, that's dumb. I don't accept that answer. I hate that answer. If you commented that, delete it right now, like right now. But like, as much as I think we'll have that, I do think maybe these invisible forces here that Lao-Tzu's talking about, that I still haven't defined, I'm kind of just hoping that people understand what I'm talking about. I mean, we've had discussions about it before on Paint&Talk, so I think you guys should know, not know, but like, you guys should, I think that this audience kind of gets my speed of like what I'm saying, because I can't really define them, and this goes back to what I'm saying of like, with science and with words, of like, there are these things that can't be defined. But that's the interesting part, right? Because I say they can't be defined, but like, what if, because this is the response that I think a lot of scientific minded people have to something like this. They go like, no, that can be explained with science. I think that's part of the reason you see like a ton of atheists in STEM, because they look at things like, God and morality, and they're like, no, we can totally explain this with science. And I think that they're kind of right in a sense. Like, of course, when you're in a field like that, and you go every day and you see your teachers or your peers explaining, or, even just colleagues in your field or whatever it may be, explaining things away with science, it only makes sense to come away from that and go, no, okay, we could explain these other things too. But we haven't. You know what I mean? I think that's kind of the middle ground here. I think somebody who's super STEM-minded would go, we can explain those away with science. Like, these aren't real. These are a fake thing, and we should pay them no mind because we can explain them away with science. And while they could be right that we can explain it away with science, like, we haven't explained it away with science, which is why I don't love that answer, because it's just not, it could be right, but it hasn't been right yet. And that's why I think working in that extreme, like, that almost leans into the Dunning-Kruger that I feel we got going right now, where it's like, we look at something like that and we're like, no, there's got to be a reasonable explanation. And I agree, like, maybe there is one. I don't dismiss that, because, like, I am a believer in science, of course, but I think that having a lack of spiritual curiosity and not saying like, okay, let's get to explaining that, or like, just going like, I should pay to this no mind because I think we'll have the answer someday, I think is like almost just a level of ignorance, right? Because like, I don't know, like, isn't it? To be like, we'll explain this someday, I shouldn't think about it. Like, imagine if when, Camus set out to find the meaning of life in his writing, he just was like, someone will probably get to this someday. I should just, like, ignore that, just hang out, go do some other stuff. Like, that's not how that works, I also don't like the other side of the coin, though. A lot of people, they hear something like that, and their immediate response is something along the lines of, like, no, these invisible forces just are God. They are this sense of spirituality that I hold. They basically go and play with the old answer to the question, right? Of, like, this is something that is already explained, and it is an exact reason of why we should get away from science. I think a lot of people have that answer. I don't like that either. Once it kind of back to what I was saying, like, I think that's a bad response, because that's the response that we've had, like, most of humanity. And, like, I just think if that was the right answer, we would know by now. You know what I mean? But then there's also the question of, like, will science prove the existence of God? I guess that's kind of the gap in that line of thinking, right? Is that, like, if science can come along and prove that there is a higher power, that's interesting. And that would probably reshape a lot of our understanding of things, right? But I think that this is, like, the sense of Dunning-Kruger I'm talking about with all of us, where we have enough to know, like, this could be answered with science, and it makes us not look at the things we don't know quite as much, because we think that we have a capability of knowing everything. And once again, like, maybe we do have that capability, but we don't have it yet, and I think that's why we all need to remain with a sense of, like, a little bit of spiritual curiosity. I kind of don't like that term, like, because it's like, I don't know if that's the way I'd want to refer to it, but, like, just a sense of, like, I don't know, just, like, almost when you're a kid, right? And you're like, you know how little you know, so anything could be true. And you're just, like, going through the motions, like, yeah, no, like, we need to retain a sense of, like, you pick up every object you see outside when you're playing in the grass, because everything could be so interesting. That's how I think we need to look at some of these questions, rather than going like, well, I already know a lot about all these other things, so the answer's probably, or, like, we probably have the answer to that, I hope that made some semblance of sense. I don't know if it did, but let's just hope, right? Because we already did it, so I guess we can't go back now. The painting is finished. I wanted to try to paint this whole, like, the vibe of, like, an invisible force. I wanted the blue to be darker in here, to give it a little bit of, like, almost like I wanted them to feel a little more invisible. It's not. So yeah, it's just not. I don't have any other blues with me here that are not dried onto the palette, so it's not. That's gonna be okay, but it still looks cool. I think it's, nice. It just is, I guess. Go check it out over on the Instagram, angles, HD camera, the whole shebang. And until tomorrow, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint and Talk episode 61. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all. Got kind of depressing there at the end. I don't know why. That was just a whole weird vibe, I guess. I don't know.